All right, we're back, and we're COMP1002, Web and Internet Fundamentals, and it's week 9, lesson 9, part 2. We just finished talking about, again, we've been talking about the box model, and I want to make my links, all my links, active somehow, right? Like I want to make them so that when I actually go into my web page here, this one, and I'll refresh, when I hover over these options, I see that my hand, see how my mouse pointer turns from a pointer to a hand. That's the default functionality when I go over a link. I can change that, by the way, by changing the cursor type, specifying a cursor, right? But it happens over when I hover, right? When I hover over my link itself, I'm expecting some kind of feedback, right, from my link, okay? When I'm hovering, when I put my mouse over a link, I'm actually responding. I want it to my CSS to help me respond to the event that I'm generating. I'm generating an event whenever I have a link. If I hover my mouse over a link, there's an event that's being triggered in the background of my page, right? Now, there's a couple ways I can respond to this event. I can respond to events, things that happen, interactivity that happens with my page, with JavaScript. I can use JavaScript to respond, right? I can also do it with CSS. CSS allows me to, when I hover over my link, right, or when I press my link or I do something with my link, I can respond to it, right? And I do that through something called pseudo classes, right? That's how we do it in JavaScript, right? How do I program this out? Let me show you this. So I want to say that every time I hover over my main nav anchor tag, right, then I want the background color to change. My color is going to change as well. My background color is going to go much darker, right? And my text color might change as well. Let's just do that. So how do I do that? First of all, the syntax looks like this. So main nav, my anchor tag, and now I'm going to use my pseudo class syntax, colon, hover, right? That means when I hover over an anchor tag that's contained within my main nav class, I want it to do something. I'm responding to this kind of event. This is the kind of event that I'm responding to. Okay, cool. Well, I want my background color. Now, this is the thing I want to talk about here. What am I affecting when I do this? My background color itself. So background color. What's my background color? It's going to be my A tag, my anchor tag, right? That's going to be affected. Well, we're going to modify this. I want to make it dark gray, right? So, or some kind of darker color than gray, almost black, right? So if I say gray, right? And if you know, there's dark slate gray and there's dim gray. Let's choose this dark slate gray. Just another kind of color. It's not quite black. Maybe that's a little bit too dark. Maybe you won't be able to tell what that is. Let's try that again. So gray, but I want a different kind of gray. So I'll say dark, you know, as an example, I can say dark gray, you know, or some kind of color that I want, like a grayish color, right? But I don't want it dark. I don't want it to be as light as before. Gray actually is actually darker. If you know, it's just gray by itself is darker than dark gray, which is kind of weird. And there's the path itself. So if I just put gray. All right, maybe we should switch these up. I'll have my dark gray color in when I hover, and my gray color as my active link. That might be better. So gray and dark gray with an A. Dark gray. Okay. Let's see what happens. And you're going to see that this is messed up, right? So I save, I go back to here, and I refresh. Notice how my active link now shows this dark gray color, and when I hover over it, only my anchor tag gets affected. Well, I actually am hovering over my anchor tag, right? But I just don't want my anchor tag to be affected. I want my whole list item to be affected. Let's go back and change that up again. So maybe it's not this, my anchor tag hover. Can I put it on my list item? Just saying. Right? So on my list item, when I hover over my list item, right, my whole list item will light up, right? And this might be a problem, okay? Because it might present the way it presents might be totally different than the way you think it should be. So I go back in and refresh. And now I hover over my list item and the whole list item lights up. That's good, right? But guess what? I still can't click on this thing, right? How come? My clickable area is only the actual link itself, right? My link itself is the clickable area. I can't just click here when I hover over, right? Because it doesn't do anything when I hover over it. If I hover over here, it doesn't do anything. The only way it works is if I hover over my anchor tag, right? So here's my anchor tag, that's the one, right? This thing here is the anchor tag is the one that allows me to do the link, right? But I have a problem. My anchor tag, there's padding around my anchor tag that I put in, right? Because I wanted it to be smart, right? And I wanted to give myself padding, right? But the padding's not around my anchor tag. The padding is inside my UL, right? See how we're designing the navigation here, right? I don't want that. I want my whole UL, my whole link, my list item to be clickable. My whole list item. Because that makes more sense from a user experience perspective, right? When I hover over my list item, if I click anywhere in that button, that whole thing is going to link, as opposed to just my link, which is that little piece that's inside, right? Which means I have to redesign my styles a little bit. I got to move my padding. I got to move my padding inside of my my anchor tag, and take it away from my list item. Okay, I'll show you that effect. Because otherwise, I'm going to get what I'm getting. If I click here, I don't get anywhere. I don't go anywhere with here. But if I click here, notice how it moves to the pound key, right? That's bad because then my user will say, I've been clicking on the bloody link forever, but it doesn't go anywhere, right? Okay, so that means let's go back to this. So my unordered list has padding of 0.8. I'm going to get rid of that, right? Actually, let's undo that. My list item has a padding of 0.8. My list item has a padding of 0.8. I'm going to get rid of this stuff. So there's no padding on my list item. But I'm going to put padding of 0.8 in my nav, in my anchor tag, right? Let's try this out and see how it looks now. So padding 0.8. That's for each anchor tag has going to have this padding, right? And refresh. Okay, that's a problem, right? Take a look at that. So my padding is 0.8%. That's not really what I want. I want my whole list item, when I click onto it, to go somewhere. So let's see if that works, right? Well, how come? Because if I refresh here for a second, and let's go back to my local host just to show you that it's not going anywhere. There we go. If I hover over here, right, notice how the hand turns this right away, but it only hovers, it only like kind of, it goes on top of my item itself. That's not what I want. I want the whole list item to be covered. Now we're going to get into troubleshooting again, right? How come it's like this? Anybody? Because I haven't specified my height of my list item, right? My list item height is 0 right now, right? It's hugging or shrink wrapping my content because I haven't added any padding. I need padding to the side. This is good. This padding over here is good, right? And if I go back to my anchor tag, that's what anchor tags do. They don't pad on top or on the bottom. I could specify my anchor tag's height as well. I could say my anchor tag has 100% height, right? But 100% height really doesn't mean anything in this context. So I'm saying, so let's say, for example, I put a height. My padding is this, but I put a height of my object for my anchor tag of 100%, right? And let's put how about a semicolon? That would be good too. All right, so let's check this out and see what that does. So height of 100% and no change, right? Like I expected, because it has no meaning. This height has no meaning in here, right? This doesn't mean anything when I put a height of 100%. Okay, that's not good. I could specify a height. I could specify a height of 0.8, right? That makes sense. That's forcing the anchor tag to have a height, yeah? That makes more sense. Let's see if it does it now. Refresh. Nothing. Right? No. You know why, right? Because what is 0.8? 0.8 of what? Right? I can't specify a height of a percent when I don't know how big my height is? How come I don't know how big my height is of my screen? And this is where it gets dangerous, peoples. Do I really want to do this? Because maybe in a long scrolling application, right, my height is going to be massive, right? Let me show you what I'm talking about here. Going back into my header, in my head of my document, I have something like this. My meta tags show this. I have a viewport with width is equal to device width. We've done that really, really early, and this is good for responsive design. And my initial scale is 1. Could I also put in something like this? My height variable then, I'm going to give you some context, is equal to device dash height with an initial scale of 1. Can I do that? And is that going to make any sense with what I'm doing here? Let's try this out. So I'm going to go back and refresh. Nothing, right? Even though I've given it a height as an example of a percent, it doesn't do anything because it doesn't mean anything in this context. Okay, well, you know what? What if this is the one area that I want a fixed height, right? I know that my typical size of my thing is around, you know, if I kind of creep in here and click on it, right, and I go all the way down, and I want to find what my borders are, right? It looks like now, this is interesting too, right? My anchor tag has 0.8%. It doesn't have an actual number in there for my padding. No border, no margin for my anchor tag, but rather 0.8%, right? So I want my anchor tag, right? And there's my auto. Auto is my the width and height of my object. Notice how there's no height in here specified for my anchor tag. I could. Let's go back and specify another value in here. So here's my anchor tag inside my main nav. I've tried to specify the height, but it's not working with 0.8%. Let's add an actual number, right? Like, for example, a line height for my, first of all, I want to specify a line height for my font, right? So in my anchor tag, I want to specify a line height first before I hit height. Line height of, let's say, and we want to work in ems, all right, at least, let's say, 1.5 ems. I want to kind of add that in. So an M and a half is what I'm saying, my line height. Let's see what the effect that has if I go here. That's pretty good. So I get a bit of more separation. That's what line height does. It gives me a little bit of space between the two things. So that's pretty good. But it still doesn't affect this link. That's the actual link text. It links here and links here. It actually does that, but the way it shows, let me go back to this for a second. Is it a physical representation problem? Like, what's the issue? Because we're troubleshooting here, right? So let me go all the way down to the bottom. Notice how it's still padding and there's no auto. Like the actual height and width, that's what this area is here. It's auto. It's not showing anything. How come? It's wrapping my text. That's what it's doing right now. Okay, cool. So that didn't do anything. So that just added more line height. How about if I just put in a height value, like height of 10 pixels? Or if I want to do ems, because that's the right thing to do, right? Ems, I want to make it so it's 1.5 ems, an actual height, right? Height of, let's say 2 ems. Let's say 2 ems. So I was gonna make it worse. Okay, let's see what that does. Height of 2 ems. Okay, so it actually got smaller, right? No height. It's like I can't do anything with this area here. This height of 2 ems. It's showing here. How about here? We'll just modify some stuff. Let's make it so instead of 2 ems, we'll go in here and say 30 pixels, and see what that does. I'm just doing it right in the browser right here, right? And that doesn't seem to do anything. How about a height of 100 pixels? It's not working, right? So any height I put onto this anchor tag doesn't seem to work. Anyone have an idea why? Anybody? And this is the challenge you guys have. Anchor tags, it's not all properties work on all items. Okay, I can try and wrap it all. That's the one thing. When you go down to an anchor tag or some kind of content tag, it doesn't give you. Have you tried it? Is it giving you anything different than me? Right? It shouldn't. Right? But what if I put a height onto my list item? My list item can have a height, right? Notice how it has a padding of 0 right now. But I want to add in my list item, in this particular list item, in my main list item li here, right? So this one. I want to put in a new style, right? That is a height of 40 pixels, let's say, something crazy. Let's see if that works. Okay, so my list items doesn't seem to work. If I refresh, it goes back. So let's try this out. Let's see if we can, when I hover over, if it does anything different if I change it here. So I'm going to go back to my list item, my main nav list item, and I specify a height. That's where we get in trouble, right? So I'm taking my height off my main nav, and I'm going to specify a height from my list item. So I'm thinking height. Height should work. It's the box model, right? And let's make it so it's crazy height, like 100 pixels. Something crazy. And if you notice, when I start typing it in, it has this little funny underscore that comes in. And if I hover over the underscore to see what it says, properties ignored due to the display. Example, with display inline, the width, height, margin top, margin bottom, and float properties have no effect. Because I've displayed it inline. That's what I've done, right? I said all of my ULs, right? All of my list items are display inline, right? How about if I change this to inline block? Will that do anything? If I go inline block. Now, see how the underline goes away? My underline goes away now, right? And if I go back and I refresh my screen, now I'm going to get some really funky stuff going on, right? Notice how my height for my list item is really big in some cases, but where my text is at the top, not in the bottom, right? How come it's doing that, right? Let's go back. And I still got a little bit of margin there and some really big margin up here, it looks like. So let's go back to this right here and see what happens, right? So obviously, the height of my list item is working. Can I put this height of 100 pixels again? Let's try this out now that I've changed to inline block, right? It's a different kind of display type. Remember, there's block, new line. There's inline, and then act like an inline and a block, inline block, right? Those are the two. And there's also none, which actually hides the item, right? So if I want to hide an item, I can just display none, all right? Think of it that way, just from an effects perspective. Okay, let's check this out. Let's just go back to my my anchor tag, and let's put in a height of 100 pixels. And let's see if that works, like a fixed height now. Because before it wasn't working, right? Now let's refresh this and see what happens. Nada. And here's a problem too. Take a look at this. How come it's showing this? How come these are compounded like this? Because I've changed my display value to inline block, right? And I haven't specified a width for any of these items. That's what inline would do. Inline allows me some, some padding. And also, if you notice, my padding's gone, right? The padding from around my anchor tag. If I go back to my anchor tag, even though I'm saying 0.8%, it's not working anymore because of inline block. Inline block is a different display type. What if I specified a fixed width? Like I said, that's bad too, right? If I said, it's a fixed width of a certain number of pixels. This didn't work for my anchor tag. How about I do a width? If I say, well, all my anchor tags have a width of, 100 pixels. Does that work? And you're going to notice that when I go back here and refresh, it does not, right? Because again, height and width isn't for my anchor tag. Height and width is for my container tag, which is my list item. So let's get rid of this. And even my padding is okay, but it's disappeared, so I can get rid of this too. And let's go back to what we had before, where my list item wraps my anchor tag, right? And if I go inline block, and if I say my width, let me do this one. First of all, let's do this. There's another property that'll help us out, which is what's causing us to have issues. And this is because our items are overflowing. They're overflowing our content. So there's a different value we can use called overflow, right? And my options are auto, right? I can also say hidden, scroll, visible, right? and so on, or none. That's another option. So let's make overflow auto for my list items and see what happens. So overflow auto means I want to shrink wrap my content, right? So now let's see what happens, if that helps us. Before we add in width and height, refresh. This is good. This is back to where we were. So once I put overflow auto, I was able to wrap my entire contents here. Okay, cool. Well, that means that, and remember that we kind of did this before when I did this, how we showed that our list items run outside of my unordered list, which means maybe if I go back to my list here, I should probably use overflow auto for my unordered list, right? Because that'll change the way my list flows around everything else too, right? So make sure I go back and I save that, and I did not, and refresh. Okay, so my list item is overflowing now. And now I can change, with good conscience, I can change my list items. Because if I start going with my anchor tag, again, remember anchor tag, I can put whatever width I want. I can say height as of, whatchamacallit, as an example of 50 pixels in my anchor tag. And if I was to show you that again, you see that it has no effect. But if I put a height value of inside my list item, this is good, right? So if I say my height is like, I don't know, 3M, that's pretty big. Let's see what that does. Okay. It's kind of what I want, but I still have the same problem. This is my list item right here, and there's my hit space right here. Right? So my actual link is way up here, but down here is where my list item goes, and it's appearing up here. Right, but I want it to kind of appear in the middle. And what can save me to put it in the middle? Padding again. So I'm back to that again, right? Which it doesn't make any sense. Right, so let's go back and get rid of the height value and go with a padding of 0.8%, which I would have had before. And I want you guys, as a test, I want you guys to see how I can expand my hit area. Look this up. Go to Google. Google it for me, please. I want to expand the hit area of my anchor tag to fill my list item. All right? See how you can fill that. See if you can Google that and find it to solve this problem with us together. All right? So refresh. This is back to what we normally would expect with, like this. But I got this additional space in here now, right, that I didn't have before in my unordered list. And I got that because I have overflow of auto, right, which means my I got to make sure that my header has just a background of black. Why am I getting this padding, right? Then it's almost like a padding that I've got around everything. Make sure that there's no other classes that I've linked on. So I've got my active, and I've got my header that has a container class on it. What does my container class do? Well, it adds in box border around my header, which is what I wanted. That's a good thing, right? So it means all my borders and everything else are inside. I don't have an active border anymore, all right? But this box border, this container, maybe is warping the way we see things, maybe, because it's putting in my margins and everything else on the inside, right? So just from a testing perspective, let's just turn this container off of my header. And I wanted to put it on for a reason all this time. And now see if there's a problem, because it's still got this separation up here, and all I've done is remove everything, right? So let's see if that does anything. Nothing, right? So I can put it back, and I feel confident that it's going to be okay, right? So what I'm doing is I'm testing my size. I have a padding of 0.8 on my unordered list, and I have a padding 0.8 on my list item. Let's take my padding 0.8 off of my unordered list, right? And see what it does. Where's that bloody border coming from, right? How come I'm getting this border? How come? Right, I'm getting no border on the top, but I got a border on the bottom. And let's see how we can target that. So if I look at my list item, right, as an example, and if I look down at the compounded styles, you can see that I got padding of 10% or 10 pixels. I don't have a border, and I don't have margins. If I go back to my unordered list, I have no border, no margins. And if I go back to my nav, nothing there either. But the one to look at is computed, right? So if I go back to my list item, I've got padding of 10 for my list item. My anchor tag has no padding, it's auto, which is where it should be. And my unordered list has nothing. And I still get this little thing in there, right? Notice how there's also separation between my items, right? Almost like I have a border around them. Okay, let's go back inside. That's the wrong one. Let's go back inside here and see if we can correct this problem. So I got overflow of auto on both of them. If I was going to turn overflow auto off, and how do I do that? I can also uncomment it for a second to see how we can do that. So there's both ways of doing it. You can turn it off, like erase it, or uncomment it. So let's go back to my style here. So save and then refresh. No difference. So I don't have any problem with this the way it is. So overflow auto does squat, so we can take that off. This overflow does do something, right? This inline block overflow. And whenever I say inline block, it has other kinds of effects, right? So if I go move back to inline, let's see what it does. And again, I want to show you this stuff so you guys are cool with it all, so that you're not surprised. Inline. How come it's doing that now, right? I just want to show you it because it's kind of weird, right? Like, how come it's doing that? And what about if I just go block? Huh? You like that? Let's go block. Just instead of inline, we'll go block. Okay, and if I refresh, I'm going to get a list that's up and down, right? There it is. Block. Right? That's block. And now what if I say none? Right? No list, right? It's all gone. All right, so that's what none does. And then inline block and block. So those are the things. So I want to use inline block just to take it back to where it is, or inline, I'm sorry, where I want to kind of put it back the way it was, we had it working, right? And if you noticed, remember what we had, our list item has a 0.8% padding, but we want to have our, the easier way to do it is to put overflow as auto now. See what this does. Going back and refresh. Notice how it's overflowing, but it's just exactly what it's doing. So it's covering now. That's what overflow auto does. If I took overflow auto away, I want you to see this because some people get really confused when they start doing stuff like this. Okay, fresh. Overflow auto is off. So what happens is the list item is is highlighted, but it's outside of the UL. The UL is not containing it inside anymore. Okay, cool, that's okay. Overflow is auto there. What if we were to move overflow into our header, right? So we put into our header information. I'm just going to go back to header, which is here. Let me just move this header because header and because header and navigation are so related, right? Because they're one's inside the other. I kind of move it down here so we can kind of have it that's available. So I'll put in an overflow auto here, right? When we talk about overflow. And so let's see if that works. Okay, so what that does. So it kind of contains that. Okay, cool. So that's what that is. So I definitely want my my list item has padding of 0.8, right? I have my overflow auto. Let's turn that off for a second and see what that overflow auto being turned off on here does. Just so that you see what I'm talking about here. Refresh. Now it's back out there, right? And my my LI, my list item itself, when I hover over it, does this dark gray and active stuff. My main nav is just got a text declaration of color and the color white. This is good, right? But remember, we had in our unordered list, itself, we had a padding inside of 0.8. So what if I turn that on again? See what it does. So we're clear on everything. So 0.8. And then tell me what it does now. Back to that, right? Notice how that when I hover over these list items, or the anchor, the unordered list is here, and see the blue area around the unordered list. The blue area shows that my list items are outside of my unordered list because they're overflowing. Okay, so this is the default overflow, right? If I go back and I change my UL, if I put that overflow back in, just to show you what I did. Now that I've added in 0.8 padding and refresh, now when I hover over my unordered list, right, notice how it's still, the content is still inside, but then it still overflows, right? And here's my nav. My nav itself is covering the whole thing. Unordered list, the blue item, right? My list items, that's my list item, right? So it's hovering the whole area. But my poor anchor tag, that little hit area for my anchor tag is just in the middle, which is the problem. How do I expand the hit area? Anyone look it up? How do I expand the hit area of my anchor tag? Okay. I'll give you guys another minute to figure that out, because that's the problem, right? So that means that if I hover down here, no effect. If I hover in here, it'll click and it'll give me a link. Neat looking, but no functionality, right? We don't want that. Okay. While you guys are looking that up, I'll continue. So we've talked about a bunch of stuff. Display block, how it does it up and down. How display none hides everything, right? And different ones are block, inline block, and none, right? Which can hide stuff, right? And also, from a visibility perspective, I can hide an element or I can show an element. That's also something. When I say visibility, that's a little different than display block. Yes? So, okay. But we are changing the list size, you're saying, the list item, right? Give me an actual code example that works. Setting the height or width of an element, you can set the height or width, and it says it works on sectioning content, paragraphs, list items, divs, images, video, and form elements. Does not say anchor tags. So width and height, anchor tags don't work. So don't even try that. We just showed that today, right? It doesn't work. Not all properties work on all items, right? And also, the width and the height is a units that you can use, right? Here's something also that you can also use. There's also a kind of thing like, if I want to use the viewport height, right? So an example would be, I want to div my main, right? And I want the height of my main to be the viewport height, the size of the height of my screen, right? How do I do that? So let's go back to my screen here, right? And I want to change my main. So not the actual thing, but my main itself, which is my main, my header. I have my container, which is part of my main, but I also want to make a class of main, and I'm going to put that near my main tag, because this is where I start affecting it. So in here, right, I want to put a main class, right, and I could put something like, so it's main, it's all content, but it's main content, right? So for my main, I want my height to be equal to viewport height, right? VH, that's something different, right? Let's see if that works first of all. All right, so I'm going to kind of go back out to here, and I'm going to refresh the screen. Oops. Go back. All right, and close this up a little bit. And you can see that it didn't do anything, right? So if I refresh everything here, and I go back and I saved. So what does viewport height do? VH. So if I look that up, if I say VH CSS, how do I do that? Right? And it has this. There's a really cool little tutorial here. It says image, and then it says height is 95 VH, right? The element a little bit of breathing room while on the page, so 95. What if I say 100 VH? Is that 100%? Is that what it means? Is that the scale that I want for my VH? Right. Let's try a number in front of VH. Right. So 100 VH. So here instead of VH we put 100. And let's see what that does. And go back to our screen and go to here and refresh. No effect, right? No effect. For my height, for my main element, right? And how about if I go back to try that again, instead of 100 VH, I'll put what they said, 95 VH, and see why. Oh wait, how about this? How about we actually apply the class? Meh. Oh, Tom. And I would put it main first, so it would be like main container. Like that's how it would read, right? Let's go back to 100. I'll be okay. And then, now that I've saved and refresh, right? It doesn't do anything still. What about if I went to 95 VH? Like it shows no effect, right? And if I was going to find the browser style, so if I was going to right-click here on my main and go to inspect element, right? We could see if it actually is even written in there. So if I look at my main itself and I scroll down, is it even in there as a VH value, right? So here's my main, I got my margin, my padding, and I got nothing, right? If it doesn't display, it doesn't work, all right? So the main didn't work. What if I made it so that I said my height, my weight, width is 40% of viewport width. Let's see if that works. All right, so refresh. That's not working either, right?
I don't think you saved
My HTML.
your
Yeah. See what I'm talking about here? It's tiredness. Hold on, look what it does. Right? So see how the main takes up 100% of my remaining viewport width. And if I scroll down, I have this. And my viewport, viewport height. My viewport width, though, there's no value because I haven't specified anything. So if I go back to this, to main, and say 100%, that's 100 VH, right? And my height is going to be 100 viewport. Sorry, let's try this again. VH here and VW here. I'll be okay. How about them apples? And then try that and refresh. So see what it's doing, right? It's taking my existing viewport height, and if I was to change this, if I was to refresh, it's going to refresh my container and reflow everything so it's always this big. Even extra space down here. I'll have extra space down here. And why would this be good? This would be good if I wanted to create almost like a slideshow type effect, right? So I can make containers, right? And each of them is the same height as my initial viewport. So when I scroll up, they each have a different color. As an example, here's how it would work. Let's say, for example, I have my main, and I want to contain all my stuff, my information here, and I want to have another one underneath my main, which is, let's say I have my main, and then I have my another article or something like that, right? So let's say I have another div tag. Let's make another div tag. So a div tag, as an example, and let's say this div tag here, this has a class also of main attached to it, right? Just because it's my main div tag, right? But there's nothing inside of it, right? And what I want to do is I want to target it as I want to call this thing my red area, right? So that's another class I'm adding, and I don't have that yet, but let's add that in. So I'll say, here's my red area, and so this is special effects. In my red area, I want to target that. I want to say red area, and will be a background color color of red, which is kind of annoying, right? But I also want it to have, so it's a main. It's using the class of main, plus it has a class of red area, which means that viewport height and width is going to be 100%. Okay, and if I go back and refresh, right? Notice how I go in. There's another page, right? So I can create pages of color, right? So I can put something in here. I can put something in here, and if I think that this is too much, right? Like 100% is too much. Let's say I want to put 50%. So my slides, if you will, have 50% of my container size, whatever they are, to make them. I make that kind of colored effect. When you see that sometimes when a website, you go to different layers, and every time you slide down, there's different colors, the whole side. That's how they do it. So if I go back down to this, and I go back down to where I said my main, where I have a class of main, which is near my main thing right now, instead of 100 VH, as an example, or 100 height, I make it so it's 50% of the height at least, or 60 VH, let's say. And VH stands for viewport height, the height of my current viewport. VW is the width of my current viewport, right? Which is, again, back to responsive design is the way we should do it, right? And if I go back to this now, if I've saved everything, save, and refresh, then I have these separations, right? I have a separation here, right? And then I have these other little areas here. So I have this blue, this gray area, and I have this other area down here. And the reason why I don't have any margin over here is because I haven't specified anything, right? And also, here's another thing that I have. Notice how this one goes outside of the box, right? Why? Because this is a container, and it contains everything. I've specified it as a container. If I take container away from main, because container I've specified as it being box sizing is equal to that whole thing where it contains inside. If I take away from my from this area here and I say my main doesn't have a class of container anymore, right? It just has the red border, right? Oh, that's just not what I wanted. I want it to come off the main over here, this one. So this, and go back and refresh. You can see now that I've got a bit of padding or margin on this side, but on this side I stick out. How come? Right? But whereas this one doesn't. Right? And again, you have to really be specific, and to tell what this all is about, I would have to go back in here and respect element, right? And you can go be very specific as we scroll up to see what our main has. Notice how now that I've specified viewport height, it'll even go beyond, look, beyond this piece, right? So if I move this up, my text will scroll, so my background is different, is a different color. My background is there's more background content than there is color, because my viewport size is only 60%, right? My viewport height is only 60% of the viewport. And my viewport's changing right now, and because it's changing, it's giving me that odd effect. But how often is would your viewport change, right? Chances are not very often, right? Like your viewport is the side. Like me doing this is the only time you'll see this weird effect, right? Okay, so I have this, and I want to specify. I want to target my main and see what I'm getting over here for my combined stuff here. I get margins of 20 all the way around, right? And I also have 20 on this side, padding of 20 on the inside, but margins of 20 on the outside. Now, where do we specify margin of 20? Right. So go back, and if you want to see it right here in my main, I specified at 20 pixels. Should I specify 20 pixels, or I'm just saying 1.6%, which is around 20 pixels? That's probably better. So let's say for my margin, I want 1.6%. And for my padding, I also want a padding of 1.6%. If we're using percents because we're kind of making a responsive design, it might make sense to do it that way. And that's a little bit better. Notice how on the inside, though, we have a problem, because 1.6% is based on the container viewport size, right? And that's a problem from a padding perspective. Take a look at what it's doing now. As I resize my viewport, I get this. So viewport height isn't always the right solution, right? I can also say minimum height along with that. So I can say, for example, my main, it's my height and my viewport height is here. But you know what? I can also specify on the rules below that my minimum height, min height, is mid width. The minimum width is 80%. I don't want to go anything lower than 80%. I also don't want a, so this is my height, and my minimum height, min height, is 80% of the view screen, which is kind of weird too. Let's see if that has any effect, because I have mid height and mid width. Refresh, no difference. And if you notice also when I go back, now that I've lost my, oh, I want 1.6 for padding, that's why it didn't work. Troubleshooting, tough troubleshooting. Here we go. Notice that I'm sticking out here. How come I'm sticking out over here? Because I'm saying that this width, right, is a certain percent of viewport width, right? And plus I'm adding all the content, plus the borders, plus everything else. So I'm getting this additional space here because it's additive, right? That's what the problem that I'm having, right? So this isn't accurate. This is wrong, what I'm trying to say here. So I'm going to go back. And again, my container is the one I want to really target, right? Because this is my main. My main is saying 100% viewport width. That doesn't make any sense. I want to kind of put that into like an 80% range. So 80% of viewport width. So save, refresh. That may be too much, right? And now take a look. How come this is different than this? Because I have other things in here that are making these two things different, right? This has nothing inside. This div tag is empty, right? And that's why it looks like this, right? Where this stuff has all this content. We have borders, we have margins, we have all kinds of stuff attached to it on top of it. If you want to make it look the same, right, then I would have to apply the same classes to it for it to work that way. Okay. I'm not going to keep going into that rabbit hole there. We can certainly use an auto value. And if I want to, what if I want to make my, I want to center an object in the middle of my screen, right? I want to center my main so it's the exact center of my screen all the time, right? How do I do that? So again, I can specify going here to my main, right? I go back to here. And where my main has a margin of 1.6, right? What I really want to say is, remember my margin and my borders and my all that stuff, it has margin top, margin right, margin bottom, margin left. I'm specifying when I say one value, it's all the way around the same, right? But what I really want to do is something like this. Let's say, for example, I want my right and left sides, right? My right and left sides to be automatic. It's going to be wherever whatever the size of my screen is, my viewport width. I want it to be automatic. I don't want it to say, you know, how much margin I have on each side. So this is where I would specify a margin of auto. If I specify a margin of auto, right, and let's see what it does for margins, right? So R auto, refresh, and now I get this a little bit of spacing on the right and a little spacing on the left, and it's exactly the same. It's completely centered. And if I was to reflow everything, that's important to do. So if I want to center something, notice how it reflows, and it's always in the middle, always in the middle. And it's always in the middle because my viewport width, I'm setting one of my values to viewport width. I'm still overflowing down here, right? And the way to stop that, how do I stop the overflow? Overflow auto, right? So I'm going to go back to my main, and because my main itself, this main object, I can put an overflow on here as well. Overflow auto, right? There we go. And let's just save and refresh and see what it does. So nothing here, but what happens when I skip down, if I go down here? This is what happens. See how it overflows, and I have this little scroll bar, right, that comes up because I've specified a maximum value, right, from my screen. I'm putting it into, I'm kind of pigeonholing it, right? I'm kind of doing one of these. I'm saying, well, you can, it'll overflow, it'll wrap, right? But it'll hide everything that's happening here. It won't go beyond that because of my controls, because I've specified the minimum, the height of 60 VH, right? Yeah. Yeah. Now if I put, what if I instead of height, I put a min height of 60 VH, and take away these other silly values, which have no interest to me. And same thing with a min width. A minimum width means I'm at least going to get this much every single time, but I may need more, right? It's not going to, kind of refresh it. Now take a look at that. So if I go over here like this, now it's from side to side, right? Side to side, and the minimum width, right? So if I kind of go over here like this, it's going to kind of expand as I need to because my overflow is auto, right? So it'll kind of form everything, and now this is a problem. Up here, see that doesn't do it right. I don't like that. I got to figure that out, right? But this, as an example, as I stretch and squash my screen, it moves, right? So the minimum width is 80. Okay, let me go back. But what I really want to do, right, is for my width value, instead of my viewport width, this is cool, for my main, I want to say that my width is 80%. If I was to do that, say if I go width, specify a specific amount, 80% period, right, 80%. And what's the difference between 80% and 80 VH, or VW, right? It's my containing, a width. Let me go back and refresh. And now you can see that there's 20% is left, so 10% on this side and 10% on this side. Whereas this one here, because it also is the same thing. This one's also main, right? But I don't have anything inside of it. It defaults to this. I'm doing this so I want you to understand how to lay out things in terms of width. If I was going to create a layout, height, width, and put things in different positions, right? It'd be important to understand that. One more thing before I let you guys go, and we'll talk about the assignment really quickly for you, because there's 2 assignments that I've kind of put up. If I want to make this div, let's make it into an aside instead of a div. We'll change it from a div to an aside. Right, here's an aside. And I'll have some default stuff in there. I'll have an H3 tag in there with a this is my aside. And then I'll put in some paragraph text, paragraph with lorem text of 100, right? So kind of some text in there as for my aside. And I want to float this thing to one side or the other in my design, right? I can use something called the float value. So if I want to go to the right, I can have something in here, another little class that I can put in, compound class again, but I can say right. I can call it right. And I can use something called float right. So I'm going to float right, and inside of my my body container. Now notice that my my aside and my main are outside of everything else. So there's no containing element. Main and aside are kind of siblings to one another, right? So what does this have? What effect does this have when I do this? Let's see if I go back and I refresh. Now I got some stuff in there, but it doesn't. I want it to float over here, but it's not. Well, why? Because there's no space for it. That's why, first of all. I have 80% viewport width or 80% for both elements. If I want one to have a different element than the other, if I want this to take up 60%, and I want this to have 20%, then I have to specify that. And I can do that by changing my aside. So my asides class right now is main and the red area. And I can make this, I'll make a class of aside just to make it so that for us, right, an aside. Whenever I have an aside, this class of aside, I will specify that the width is not 80% anymore. It's only 30%. Of the containing container, and I have my for my main, right, to give him some space. I'll make this as something like 50%. Let's see what that does. Let's see if I go back here and refresh. I get this situation here, right? I've almost got it, right? It looks like it should need enough space, but I can't do margin auto anymore because it's trying to assign an auto margin to both sides. If I take that off and go like this, I can see that this is here, and I want to go, to the right. That's what I'm trying to do. But really, what I want to say is I want to hover. I want to do a float left. Okay, so let's try this out. So I'm going to go back. And what does float do? Float actually takes the whole element and moves the whole element to the right or left of its parent element, right? I am to the right, effectively, right? And so let's just do another one and say, I'll call it left. Anyone not understanding what I'm doing? Because we're not going to move on if you guys don't get. I'm not doing JavaScript until you guys get this piece, right? So left. So if I go here and in my aside instead of, I didn't put it right. Let's do that properly. Let's put left in there. So an aside left, okay? And this is float to the left, and this my aside is minimum width 30. Let's try this out and see what it does. And notice how my copyright floats to the left, right? But my here in my main, it didn't float to the left. Okay, let's try that out. So let's put float to the left on there too and see what happens. really quickly, and then we'll let you guys go. We'll talk about that assignment in 2 seconds. Right, here we are, it's left, and refresh, right? And notice how I'm trying to float to the left, but I don't have enough space to float to the left, and that's why I'm not going over here, right? Because it only goes over there when I want it to, right? And what if I want to give it some space to do it? What can I do? How can I make so that I want a 2-column layout? I want to lay one on this side and then another one over here. How can I do that, right? Well, it helps to have a wrapper container, right? So I wrap this whole thing in a container. I'll call this div tag. Div tag with a class of wrapper, let's say. And this wrapper itself is going to have, it's going to enclose both of these items, and we can give our wrapper some width and height. So we're going to continue this because I think we need more work with this kind of stuff, moving things around, 2-column layout, all this kind of stuff next week. I'm not going to hit the other ones. I'll put the other PowerPoints up, but I want you guys to, they're there for reference material right now. I'm not going to move ahead until we can cover it up. One more thing before you go, please. Give me one more second. If I go into your assignment number 3, which I've just put up, is assignment number 3? Assignment number 4, which I just didn't label it properly here for us. Assignment number 4, which is under lesson 9 in your folder. Notice that this thing is due, your assignment number 4 is due a couple weeks out. And again, and all you're doing here is it's an assignment based on some navigation and with wayfinding lists, and you're going to be doing things like that we've been already talking about with pseudo classes and so on. We start talking about pseudo classes today with hover. There's other ones, link and visited and focus, that we'll cover. Again, that's why it's due in a couple weeks, right? That's that one. And the other one, the lab, is due next week, right? And the lab focuses strictly on the box model, thinking inside the box. So it gives you a little bit of practice on the box model, and then we can have some intelligent conversations next week around, hey, what could we have done differently than what I was doing today? Okay? Any questions around this before we go? Yes. Yes. Any questions before we go? Anyone else? You guys are all good? You guys are perfect with the box model, right? Yeah. Okay. All right. I'll come over. Take care.